Welcome everybody to our webinar, our national webinar, Building More Resilient Food Systems that Support Health, Local Economies, and Equity. We're going to hear stories from Michigan, Kansas, and North Carolina. I'm Rich Pirog. I'm the director for the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems. Our partners here today with us are the Center for Environmental Farming Systems at North Carolina State University, the Kansas Health Foundation, and KC Healthy Kids. So working for food system change across the state is a complicated and oftentimes challenging prospect. And all of us in all of our work, everybody on this webinar today, I'm sure, are using networks to advance their food system goals. Today, what we want to do is share 3 state-based stories whose mutual goal, and this is one of the reasons why we're doing this together, we all have this mutual goal of achieving more democratic action on food and health issues and informing state policy in our states. And over the years, our 3 states have come together in part because we were aware of each other's work through different kinds of channels and networks, and because we've learned from each other over the years. So we're really excited to share this 3-part story, 3 different states: Michigan, North Carolina, and Kansas. That's actually the order we'll be in. Michigan will go first. And to moderate this session, I'd like to introduce a colleague of mine at the Center for Regional Food Systems, Kalia Souza. Kalia is the Food Systems Equity and Advocacy Specialist at the center. She oversees the development of a community of practice and technical assistance for both local regional sourcing and food systems diversity, equity, inclusion under the GUSNIP, or the Nutrition Incentive Hub, the National USDA Nutrition Incentive Program. And she also leads efforts in Michigan, in addition to her national work, supporting work in the local food council network and with a statewide food and health network as well. And prior to coming to our center this past May, she was an assistant researcher and project coordinator for K-State, Kansas State Center for Engagement and Community Development. So with that, Clea, I'm going to turn things over to you. I will be managing the slides, and I know we also have a poll question here to share.
All right, well, thank you for that welcome, Rich. And a few housekeeping notes before we get started. The Q&A box is available for you to interact with our presenters. If your question is geared toward a specific presenter or state, then please indicate that in your question. Our presenters will be answering questions directed toward them as they finish up their presentations, but we'll also have time at the end to answer both general and state or presenter specific questions. Presenters may also post web links of interest, so keep an eye out for that. And then finally, this presentation will also be recorded and shared with registrants. And given that, we should be able to get started with that poll question that Rich mentioned. Okay,
you should be seeing the poll question now.
Mm-hmm. So we'll give everyone a little bit of time to chime in on that. Looks like we're more than halfway there. And still a few more responses trickling in. Give it just a few more seconds, and then Rich, whenever you're ready, you can end the polling. We've still just got a couple coming in.
I'm ending the poll now.
Okay, so in response to the question, please choose one or more responses that best characterize your involvement with local food councils. Being able to choose several options Looks like 38% of you said that you are involved in an active council, followed by 26% of you saying that you're involved in or connected with a network of local councils. Then also about a quarter of you are helping to get a council started, but we also have several responses indicating there's interest in getting involved or no current involvement. So thank you for participating in that poll. That really helps us as presenters to have an idea of who is in the room. So we're going to go ahead and start off with the Michigan story. So our presenters for Michigan are Lindsay Scalera and Liz Gensler. Lindsay brings over a decade of facilitation and community organizing experience to her work as a community food systems collaboration specialist at MSU Center for Regional Food Systems. And she collaborates with partners throughout Michigan to update the Michigan Good Food Charter and build momentum for an inclusive statewide food policy voice. Liz Gensler has been an outreach specialist with the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems since 2012. She co-coordinates the Michigan Local Food Council Network, a community of practice for local food and food policy councils. And prior to joining Center for Regional Food Systems, she served as coordinator for a county-wide collaborative of food access organizations. So Liz is making her way through Big Ten universities with a master's degree in public affairs from Indiana University and a bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin. So I'll hand it over to Lindsay to kick off the Michigan story.
Hi, everybody. So hopefully you can see us there or see my face. But so I'm Lindsay Scalera. I'm with the community. Well, I don't need to introduce myself much more. I think Kalia did an excellent job, but I am with the Center for Regional Food Systems and I work on the Michigan Good Food Charter. So we'll go to the next slide and talk about what that is. Okay, so just to help you understand sort of the foundation of our work with local food councils, it's important to understand the Michigan Good Food Charter. So what is it? It's a roadmap for a food system that's rooted in local communities and centered on this concept of good food. Go to the next slide. It outlines a vision, a description of a good food system, and 6 priority areas to help us advance that vision. Next. And we can use a document like this to explore ideas, identify common ground for collaboration. We can organize collective action and shared measurement, and we can use it to inform policymakers of statewide and local priorities. Go to the next slide. So it was originally published in 2010, based on a recommendation from the formerly existing Michigan Food Policy Council. We had a state food policy council from about 2005 to 2015. The charter itself helped build momentum for efforts across the state to promote a food system or to advance a food system that promotes equity, health, sustainability, and thriving economies. Hundreds of people across Michigan weighed in to determine the 6 goals and 25 agenda priorities that were outlined in the charter. And they were all goals to achieve for 2020. And it was centered around this idea of healthy, fair, or of good food being healthy, green, fair, and affordable. We have the Center for Regional Food Systems. We were one of the 3 guiding partners, responsible for the creation of the charter. And we've kind of maintained communication and coordination support and responsibility for it. So we're kind of a backbone organization. So we can go to the next slide. We're currently in the process of updating the charter, as I mentioned, which is where, when I said there's a vision and 6 priority areas, but what I wanted to do is give you kind of a sense of where we started in 2010. And that's important because, well, it helped guide the way or shine a light on the potential of food policy councils. So you don't have to go through this. You can find it on our website, and I can put that link in the chat. But the couple things I wanted to mention was that one of those 25 agenda priorities was to use policy and planning strategies to increase healthy food access in underserved areas. And I think Liz is going to go into a little bit of how that was picked up and moved with after the publication of the charter. And I'll just say that a number of local councils have kind of grounded their work in the charter and used it over the years as kind of a way to organize themselves. And I'd say this shared document And the vision has also helped and set the foundation for the development of our local food council network. So I'll stop there. And if there's more questions about the charter, I can answer those later. But I think we'll go to the next slide and turn it over to Liz.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. And as Lindsay said, we felt like it was important to sort of lay that foundation because the Good Food Charter is somewhat of a unique document, and it's really been helping bring our work together and guide what we're doing collaboratively in the state for a decade now. So as Lindsay mentioned, Agenda Priority 6 had a recommendation to establish food policy councils. One of the specific suggestions was to use them as a forum to address the food system as a whole rather than in a fragmented way. So we laid out a little timeline of events. So in 2010, we published the charter. At that time, there were 4 or 5 councils in the state. By 2012, we did have, starting in 2005, actually, a Michigan Food Policy Council that was that was started by executive order of our then governor. And in 2012, they were investigating and trying to network food councils, but the group was disbanded when a new governor came in, and those efforts didn't really take hold before that happened. So the work that the Michigan Food Policy Council did really laid the foundation for CRFS to commission an assessment of the potential for a statewide network. And we found that there was a lot of interest in councils connecting across the state. By 2014, there were about 17 councils in the state, and they got together in a few meetings and contributed to the development of goals and a structure for the network. And helped us figure out, what these groups actually needed from us and from one another. So we launched the network in 2015 and have been going strong since then. In 2016, we started a seed grant program, really to help with sort of an internal goal of getting the whole state covered by a council, so that they had sort of a voice in this. In the process. As you can see on our map, we're not quite there yet, but now in 2020, we do have 26 councils and 2 in development. So we'll be able to shade a few more of those boxes in green soon. But in 2016, we started that seed grant program really to support capacity building within the existing councils, because so many of them had pretty much no budget, were often all volunteer led or had just a tiny slice of somebody's time to make things happen. So we wanted to help their moving forward within their councils, help new councils develop, and help build the network so that there could be more learning across the state. If we can move to the next slide. Thanks. So the big question is always, how do you do this? And we were lucky enough to have funding. It's been through 2 sources for the Michigan Local Food Council Network. First, since 2014, we've had funding from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to support collaboration infrastructure and capacity building within good food organizations. And we see the Local Food Council Network as a critical part of Michigan's good food infrastructure. And then in 2019, we added the Michigan Health Endowment Fund as another partner. They provide support for the Local Food Council Network generally, for capacity building and technical assistance, and for linking councils with statewide food and health networks. So we've tried to connect the local councils with statewide groups like the Michigan Farmers Market Association, Michigan Food and Farming Systems, to try to create those relationships across different levels. Move to the next slide. So some of our network activities, as I mentioned, we have the seed grant program. We have had 4 rounds of funding and have distributed about $133,000 to 20 councils. We provide state and federal legislative updates. That's one of the biggest things that people say is of value to them. We do that through monthly phone and video conferences, and at some point in the past, we did also do that through in-person meetings, and hope to do it in the future. We, as coordinators of the network, try to participate in statewide meetings on food policy to be able to bring that information. And again, because so many of the councils are staffed by volunteers, if we can be the ones spending our time at those meetings representing councils and then bringing the information to the network, that can really help with the flow of information. So we participate in a couple of those groups. We send information digests. We have a listserv of, I think, over 300 people now. And then we provide capacity building trainings. And we've recently started learning cohorts of small groups that are working with TA providers more intensively to work on things like fund development, diversity, equity, inclusion, advocacy, and relationship building. So if we move to the next slide. So in the realm of equity, with our 2019 round of seed granting, we used a participatory grant making model, really trying to sort of democratize that process a bit, shift decision making away from coordinators and more into the hands of peer councils. It was also useful to build relationships among councils and allow for more dialogue among those councils about their projects and allow them to learn from one another before they really got into the meat of it. While we had been working somewhat quietly on equity issues for the past several years, such as asking seed grantees to address how representative they are of their communities and how they would work to become more representative, the events of 2020 have really helped crystallize for us the need for us to center equity in our work and discussions. So we've been working to foster a culture of respectful but challenging dialogue around racial equity and food justice issues on our calls. And we've worked to create a set of offerings to the network. And in some cases, those are going to be offered to the statewide food and health networks that I mentioned before as well. So this is a list of some of the things we have on tap, and we just finished in October. We did a racial equity and food justice training for our entire network. It was a two-part training that we hired a consultant to conduct for us, and really tried to get into concrete ways that councils can address diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. We're getting our advisory team up and running to help us design a series of offerings that we'll conduct in early 2021, taking a sort of a deeper dive into issues of the intersection between food and racial equity. We're asking our advisory team to help us plan for speakers, for format, to make that as valuable as we can to members of the network. We are also launching in January our diversity, equity, and inclusion learning cohort. So that will be a group of, I believe, 6 councils and 1 statewide network that are going to work with our consultant and Kalia to, through a series of meetings for the first 6 months of the year, to really dive into these issues and how they play out within their councils and to create equity action projects. We are also planning to do an inclusive meeting and membership training in spring that would be open to everyone to help councils who are thinking about how they expand the pool, expand their breadth of membership. So if we can move to the next slide. Obviously, one of the biggest issues, one of the biggest things for councils in 2020 has been COVID-19. The councils and the organizations that generally make them up were really hard hit by the effects of the pandemic. For some, this meant their work ground to a halt. For others, it just meant shifts in what their focus was for the year. And others really saw some new opportunities or an increased need for their work that pushed them to do even more. We have a report that will be released in January with the results of interviews that our evaluation team conducted in July and August this year. They talked with 19 council leaders and discussed council's adaptations, the impacts of the pandemic, needs, and sort of what the new normal looks like and what we need coming out of it. Councils told us that they were really working to stay on top of policy changes, to share information and ways to advocate. A lot of them either started new meetings or started attending new meetings to be that conduit for information, to make sure they knew everything that was going on and could connect all the dots in their communities. Councils worked to support food assistance operations, created how-to guides, worked on zoning, helped farmers sell online. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear was that federal programs like pandemic EBT and school food service flexibilities were really critical to communities being able to weather the crisis in the food realm. And we continue to hear that the continuation of those benefits and the relaxation in some of the rules will be key to communities recovering. Let's see, we can move to the next. Yeah, so I just wanted to share, if we have a couple minutes, share a few of the quotes from those interviews. I'd imagine that this reflects a lot of what you all are hearing in your communities and your councils if you're involved in them as well. We had one council member say, during COVID, they say it's an emergency, but a lot of the people who need food, for those people, their daily life is an emergency. So they've been working to remove barriers and was asking, why are we putting the barriers back up? And that's something that we've heard over and over. We have been, we've allowed for policies to become more flexible in this time, more flexible than they ever have before. And we want to make sure that that continues, that the state agencies, federal agencies continue to say, yes, we can do that instead of saying no. We also heard that we need to look at developing sustainable food systems that are led by Black leaders, that Black-led initiatives need to be prioritized since many of the resources are not being allocated to target those communities. Next slide. A couple of the sort of big picture lessons that we heard from councils. One related to both the disparities in how the pandemic was affecting different communities and it just in general with the protests of earlier this summer around racial equity. We were hearing that we really need to look at the language that we use and look at our partnerships and be really candid and direct about the issues. One council said, we've spent many years being nice about issues like racism and wages and healthcare, and we need to be much more direct. And finally, another council said something that I'm guessing you all have really felt lately is the importance of having networks, of working collaboratively and having trusted relationships in place being critical in a time of crisis. So people have a place to go to work with others and aren't trying to form those critical pieces of infrastructure as they move through a crisis. So I think we will skip this next slide and just go to the Food Security Council. I wanted to mention one sort of opportunity that has come up for us, and one of the things that we as coordinators are participating in is the Food Security Council that our governor just established back in August. The charge of that group is to really look at all the food security issues and ideas that are out there and come up with a plan that the state could possibly implement, or bits and pieces of that. So they have been charged with creating 2 reports, one specific to the COVID-19 pandemic that was due last month, and a general one that will be due in February of 2022. So we had the opportunity to present to that group in September to kind of present what we were hearing from councils across the state, and to sort of make ourselves available as a resource as they move through their work. And then we, the coordinators, will continue to attend those meetings as they go on so that we're in the loop on that. One of the council members is also a food policy council member, and another council member regularly participates in our meetings. And interestingly, another council member is one of our funders. So, so hopefully we'll have that well represented. If we can move to the next slide, and I think we can actually skip over this because I do want to throw it back to Lindsay to talk about how this fits big picture.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Liz. So we really see the statewide food policy councils as a crucial piece of how we achieve our goals that we've set out for ourselves in both the 2010 charter and this update process that we're in. And the way we've started to talk about it is about this collaboration infrastructure in Michigan. So when the pandemic hit, a lot of our partners kind of like, we knew how to find each other. We knew who our collaborators are already because we've been spending years building up trust and working with each other on these things. And we have sort of an ecosystem of networks available to us in Michigan to be able to sort of mobilize and find each other. So we want to continue to develop that collaboration infrastructure. And as it relates to this sort of statewide food policy action, we know that we want to make sure our councils and statewide networks are able to sort of be informed, stay informed, and in fact inform other processes. Share what they know and what they see. Be able to sort of know how to make that decision to act and then mobilize. And that either mobilizing themselves as individuals or mobilizing their networks and their councils. So that's what we're going to be focusing on as we continue to update the charter, figure out, we're going through a statewide process to do regional and network outreach to find out what are the strategies that we want to continue with or that we haven't tried yet. That are going to help us achieve our vision, and exactly how can we support food councils, and how can they support these shared goals that we have. So I think I can end it there. Oh, we do have an example, but I don't know if we have time to talk about that. Liz, did you want to say something about 10 cents?
Way on time. I think we probably.
We could skip it we could have a whole other webinar just on that. So we can go to our last slide, which has our contact information. And I will put in the chat a link to our local food council network information page.
And then Liz and Lindsay, if there's anything you want to say about 10 cents a meal in Q&A, then feel free to do so. Yeah. But thank you, Liz and Lindsay, for your presentation. And we are going to transition now to our slides for the North Carolina story. And starting us off while we're getting those slides together will be Lashana Austria. Lashana Austria is a farmer, a native North Carolinian, and a reforming nonprofit executive director. And she now owns her own consulting business as a coach and trainer for individuals and organizations on their racial equity journey. Lashana leads community food strategies, racial equity coaching work with food councils throughout the network. And joining Lashana will also be Abby Piner, who is a native of East North Carolina and now calls Durham, North Carolina home. Her work over the last decade at the intersection of food and community builds on her training in public health, horticulture, and design. Abby works with the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, or CFIS, as project director of community food strategies, a multi-organizational project team supporting a network of local food policy councils across North Carolina that are increasing the capacity of local communities to create an equitable food system. So with that said, Lashana, kick us off into the North Carolina story.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Kalia. You can go to the next slide. You can see here on our screen, hey everybody, the Community Food Strategies team. There's a photo of us. Community Food Strategies, we're a collaboration of organizations with 9 team members you see there across multiple sectors. Both Abby and I, we're so glad to be here with you today. And so Abby's gonna get us started with a little bit of history about our network.
Yes, thank you, Lashana. And we can go to the next slide, Kalia. So happy to be here and excited to share about the work of this network across North Carolina. So you'll notice some similarities in how this network got started from the story in Michigan, and we've been glad to be in thought partnership with them for several years now. The network in North Carolina also started around 2010 out of a statewide process to convene folks around how do we build a local food economy in North Carolina that is vibrant and sustainable. And so through that statewide process, this report that was called the Farm to Fork Report was created, and it included 11 what we called game-changing ideas for what we need to invest in North Carolina to move forward a sustainable local food economy. And all 11 of those have moved forward in some way or another. One of those recommendations was to engage decision makers in strategic food systems planning and implementation, and specifically to establish a statewide food policy council and to support the development of local food policy councils. And so this next slide is just a quick shout out to my boss at the Center for Environmental Farming Systems, Nancy Creamer, who is retiring in February and has just been such a stronghold of moving this work forward in North Carolina. So quick shout out to Nancy Creamer, and appreciate her dedication, all she's done. And if you go to the next slide, Kalia, that piece around creating a statewide food policy council happened in 2010. That report came out early in that year, and the governor at the time was a part of those convenings and did implement a legislated statewide food policy council. And similar to Michigan, but for less amount of time, the state level legislative council was in effect until we had an administration change just 2 years later. And when the new administration came in, the legislation on the state level council was sunsetted. But that group of people, the majority of the organizations and institutions at that table, decided to keep meeting. And for the past 7 years, since 2013, that group has been meeting on a volunteer basis, at least quarterly every year. And we'll talk later in our slides about the impacts of this work, but the relationships that have been built over that course of time have really come to bear during COVID, with some really quick and important response in our state. So we do continue to have a state food council, and Community Food Strategies works with this group to support the local food council across North Carolina. So if you go to the next slide, Kalia, this is a map of generally what our network looks like now. We have 100 counties in North Carolina, and right now we have about 38 food councils, most of them county-based, some of them municipal, and some of them regional. And so if you go to the next slide, we just wanted to give you a sense of how this work has evolved. And so when the state level council was de-legislated in 2012, beginning of 2013, there was some real energy put towards this idea that a network of locally based food policy councils would actually be a lot more sustainable and less susceptible to these shifts in administration. And so we were funded at the Center for Environmental Farming Systems to develop a network of local food policy councils. We were funded by the Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina Foundation, who really believed in this concept of identifying the priorities and solutions at a local level, and then working to network those groups so that we could roll up those solutions at a statewide level. And so CEFS partnered with several other organizations, and Community Food Strategies, as LaShawna named, is intentionally multi-organizational. So we can cover multiple sectors of the food system, and we mirror the local councils that we work with by working across organizations towards food systems change. So this is a bit about how we developed. In 2014, we did our first statewide food issues forum and brought together what were then the 12 food councils across the state to learn and work together in a convening. And then in 2016, we had grown to 25 councils across the state. So we were doing a lot of expansion. We were doing a lot of technical assistance and support to develop these councils across the state. And we really took a minute to recognize with the Committee on Racial Equity at CEFS that without addressing the issues of structural racism embedded in our systems, it was likely that whatever policies we created and practices we created out of this network we're going to replicate the disparities that we already see. And so we really took the time to make a commitment to a racial equity approach. And we did that first internally as a community food strategies team. We brought on a member from the Committee on Racial Equity and started developing our own internal practices. And then that next year in 2017, we brought that commitment to a racial equity approach and practice to the full network of what was then 30 food councils in North Carolina. And since then have been working to deepen that approach. So in 2018, we did a series of racial equity trainings to start to build shared language and analysis around racial equity with what were then 35 councils. And in 2019, we brought on Lashana and her work to deepen coaching with individual councils and what their practices around racial equity will look like. And the other two things that are named in here, we did start to also take a look at developing more of a regional approach, so cross-county approach, really recognizing that to develop a regional food economy, we needed to have some sort of regional working layer here. And then also looking at democratizing the network. So really starting to explore shared gifting as one example of a way to embed more of how we do our work with the members of this network. And the last thing I want to say about this evolution is just that you'll notice that in those first 4 or so years, we expanded pretty quickly and we're really focused on having more councils in the network. And for the last 3 or so years, we've really been trying to deepen our work and focusing on the how of this and really looking forward to, as councils join the network now, that they are really embedded in this racial equity approach with us. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lashana, who's going to give us kind of a snapshot of what this sort of pivot into a racial equity approach has looked like in one council.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. You can get to the next slide. So Alamance County is, it's my hometown. I've been here all my life and I'm deeply involved in our local food council here. And so you just heard Abby talk about sort of this evolution of the network, and I'm going to really give you a bit of evolution for a local council, which is here in my hometown. And over the past few years, we've been working more deeply around food and racial equity, racial justice. And along the journey, we realized here on a local level that we didn't really have full representation of our community. Our meeting times didn't always allow for full participation. And the strategy was more, really more that of gatekeeping than it didn't allow for a deep understanding of the deeply rooted inequities within our local food system. So with a lot of help from community food strategies, and along the journey, we've learned some valuable lessons and made some changes. We've initiated a farmers market in a historically underserved community, hosted book conversations, and really delighted that, you know, one of those book conversations being Freedom Farmers, where Monica White engaged with us and our local food council through Zoom. And all of that with the hope that we would bring about a more equitable food system and serve as an example for other grassroots food initiatives as we go along the journey. And I'll just say that if you hadn't read the book Freedom Farmers, I'll put a plug in for that. Monica White has been really instrumental through our conversations with her in helping us to reform and re-strategize here on our local level here in Alamance County. And so, you know, we're just continuing to take those steps and continuing to have those deep conversations about race and food, specifically here in our community, but also throughout North Carolina and throughout the country as well. You can get to the next slide. And so really want to just list here a few ways that our work has been impactful. You know, with the racial equity coaching that Abby mentioned, we're working with councils to really think through strategic intentions. I offer racial equity trainings for the network and affinity group caucusing as well. to go deeper with those conversations about race and food in their respective networks. We like to work on all three levels, as you see here on the screen as well, with the personal, the institutional, and the cultural. This year, we offered our shared gifting circles, which we believe were very meaningful to our network, where we were able to offer funding to councils in our network through a non-traditional model that allowed councils to share and gift to each other. And so one of our network members, he said, I remember taking down this quote, he said, "This is what philanthropy should be." So we believe that our shared gifting model this year has directly influenced and strengthened our desire to really lead and support councils with more relational culture, to really be intentional about building relationships, to really be intentional about really crossing those lines and saying, hey, we really want to spend some intentional time together, getting to know one another so we can build and move together. Part of the struggle that we've seen over in Alamance as well was that, you know, some of those relationships weren't built. We didn't have relationships with folks. And so when it was time to bring people to the table, we couldn't do that because we didn't know them, and we hadn't been in our community, and we hadn't been working on relational culture. And so we believe that these models have really led us into a more relational place of building and being together within our network, within our own organizing that we're doing with community food strategies as a team as well. I'll pass it over to Abby. She's going to talk a little bit about these impacts within our network.
Thanks, LaShawna. Yeah, so we won't walk through all of these examples, but just wanted to share some of the impacts at both the local and the state level that these networks are reflecting. And just want to name that, you know, I mentioned that the State Food Council has been meeting on a voluntary basis for 7 years now, and the relationships there have just been really important, and this has been reflected in local councils as well. But existing networks were so critical this past year during COVID response to in the local council level, councils really became a hub for communication and coordination of hunger relief and food system solutions, and were really looked to by county government in several places to be that hub of information. And at the state level, I'll just point to the example, this last bullet under the right column of cold storage for emergency food, as I'm sure was reflected in you all states as well. The need for cold storage, both from food banks as well as our food hubs across the state, was in high need. And the State Food Council was meeting weekly, and they would ask, what are the pinch points and how can we help solve them? And so they do have members of local councils on the state council as well that were able to really name what are those pinch points, and cold storage kept coming up. And because of the relationships across corporations, organizations, and agencies, the state council was able to really direct existing cold storage to lots of different places across the state. So they were able to really help solve that immediate problem, but they're also able to really hold this vision that the emergency solutions this year are also opportunities to build towards the infrastructure that we need for a regional food system that can really help support a regional food economy and really move us forward in the gaps in infrastructure. So one example of ways that those relationships were really critical. And then just a couple of examples to highlight on the local side. As we look at kind of taking that equity perspective, the top bullet here reflects that one of our local councils in 2015 created a tax fund in their county to support sustainable agriculture programs and projects, and offered that as a model to other councils. And several other councils are taking that on and considering how that can look in their communities. One of those councils this past year got to the point where they were about ready to present this opportunity and solution to their county leaders. And they really recognized that the mechanism to get the funds out in their county were still really going to be held by existing power brokers. And historically, funds were not getting to Black and brown farmers and business owners. And so they really took a step back, like in the Alamance perspective, took a pause and really said, you know, we don't want to move forward a policy that is going to continue to move funds in a direction that doesn't support a more equitable allocation. And so instead, they've created a Black and brown farmer roundtable, and they're really working with that group to develop relationships and to move from a relational culture into what are solutions that we are interested to move forward. And if it is this tax fund, in what way would that look best for our community? And there's also some examples here of just community-rooted solutions. The third bullet here, neighborhood emergency food planning. Out of COVID, one of our food councils is working with 3 neighborhoods in their county to do neighborhood emergency food planning. So they have some seed funding from their county sustainability office, but the food council coordinator is supporting and facilitating these neighbors to name solutions that would allow them to support feeding each other in future crises. And so that's starting with things like community gardens and corner food pantries, kind of like a mini public library, but a mini food pantry. It's starting there, but they expect that to really grow into cooperative models for supporting themselves around food. And so some examples of how building towards relational culture and equity is producing these types of solutions that we are hoping will populate more of the network and really support a more equitable food system moving forward. And so if you'll go to the next slide, Kalia, we just wanted to share a little bit about what we're looking towards in 2021 and beyond. And the way I would kind of sum up this slide is similar to some things happening in Michigan. We're really noticing that out of shared gifting, the opportunity for these councils to learn together and offer support to one another has been really energizing. And so we're looking for more opportunities to do co-learning towards collective action. So that co-learning really offers opportunities to build relationship, and out of those relationships to move into action together. And so we'll support that through our continued coaching. We are developing a toolkit around this relational culture idea that's embedded in the principles we use around racial equity. So we'll be excited to share that in early 2021. And in addition to continuing shared gifting, we're looking into exploring solidarity economies with this network and how economies align with our food system work across North Carolina. So next slide, Kalia, is just an image of some of the amazing work that's happening in these local councils that we are really excited to get to represent to you all. And the final slide is just our contact information.
All right, thank you, Abby and Lashana. And we are going to get ready to transition into our final presentation, which will be hosted by Jeff Usher and Miranda Klugashers. So Jeff Usher is a senior program officer for the Kansas Health Foundation. In the last 21 years, he has supervised a portfolio of nearly 800 approved grants, totaling more than $170 million to support the mission of improving the health of Kansans, providing technical assistance to applicants and grantees, and working with foundation staff to develop program initiatives. A graduate of Wichita State University, Mr. Usher received a bachelor's degree in psychology and has also been active in several volunteer organizations, including the Wichita Health and Wellness Coalition, the Kansas High School Cycling League Development Team, and the Governor's Council on Fitness. He's an avid cyclist and grandfather to 9 beautiful grandchildren. Miranda Klugashers was born and raised in the Midwest. Miranda believes the process of creating food systems change that works. I'm sorry, let me start that again. It starts and ends with community, food systems change work. So for over a decade, Miranda has helped communities in 3 countries and multiple US states create stronger local food systems, but Kansas is her favorite. And as director of the Kansas Alliance for Wellness, Miranda oversees a network of local food councils and stakeholders who together are building resilient, equitable food systems in the Sunflower State. So with that said, Jeff, let's get started on the Kansas story.
Thanks, Kalia. And what wonderful work going on in Michigan and North Carolina. I'm very impressed. And I know that we need to stay connected because I think we could learn a lot from both North Carolina and Michigan. I'm just going to briefly talk about how we got to where we're at today. And the story goes back to about 2009 when we started investigating how we were going to fund community coalitions that can really make impact on health. And one of our past funding efforts, whenever we asked people to gather to think about how to improve health, most of what the plans emerged were, we're going to educate the population. We're going to more technical solution to actually making progress on healthy behaviors. So we decided to investigate how we would convene communities. And so we spent about 9 months beginning in 2009, just looking at seeing what was going on in the state of Kansas, hearing from other folks. That's, I think, how I met Rich, who's now at Michigan, but he was in Iowa at the time. And one of the things that we realized is that we really needed these coalitions, these community coalitions, to think about policy systems and environmental change if they're going to make progress. And so what we did is we launched our first round of healthy communities with 12 communities, and we told them we wanted them intentionally to focus on a policy priority in their communities that had to do with either active becoming physically active through the built environment or policy around access to healthy foods. So that was very successful. We were seeing a lot of progress. It was more of a top-down advocacy model where they engaged policymakers from the coalition's perspective. So it was mostly cross-sectorial leadership teams in these communities making progress by engaging public officials. And then in 2013, we really realized that we need more conversations just around the food systems work that was happening across the nation. And there, at that time, there was one food policy council, and it's very successful food policy council in Douglas County, Kansas, which is the home of University of Kansas. So we just thought we would experiment with launching what we called our food policy request for proposals. And it was pretty open, and we just said any community that would be able to get a publicly appointed food policy council would be eligible for a $10,000 planning grant or a $40,000 and a $40,000 implementation grant. And since we already were working with, it went from 12 communities or healthy communities to 20, several of those healthy communities picked a food policy council as a policy priority. And so that's kind of how we launched our food policy work in Kansas. But one of the first things that started to emerge, at the same time, we also funded in 2013 at the same board meeting, actually, what we called our statewide partnership program. And that was where we funded 5 statewide organizations that worked on food access in various sectors. And 2 of those, I'm not going to go through all of them, but 2 of those were Casey Healthy Kids, and another was American Heart Association. Casey Healthy Kids really was going to focus on more statewide policy, and they ended up focusing their policy priority on sales tax on food. And then we all in the American Heart Association, they focused on really local community, so as we were getting more food policy councils emerging through our Healthy Communities initiative, and they were getting money to do something, these food policy councils were going, okay, now we got $10,000. What do we do with it? How do we do a food system assessment? How do we do? And so we had to, in working with the statewide partners, we started coming up with plans to on how to do that. And we ended up doing some contracting with some folks and other folks, and that all evolved. Was very successful. We saw more and more food policy councils emerging. American Heart Association provided the technical assistance for that. And so then we did another round of funding through American Heart Association in 2016 to continue that funding. And we continued to also provide, we gave them some re-granting dollars that they could use to support these food policy councils. And when that ran, that grant was closing down, and Miranda will talk a little bit more about that. But we decided we needed to have a transition. There were some leadership changes at the American Heart Association, and so when that grant ran down, Casey Healthy Kids, we were still funding them as well to work on statewide food policy work. And they were interested in really getting more involved at the local community level. So that was when we started talking to Casey Healthy Kids about taking over the Kansas Alliance for Wellness. And so so we're funding again. So this will be the third round of funding that we've provided to provide technical assistance to food policy councils across the state of Kansas. And with that, I think I'll just turn it over to Miranda. She has most of the content, and let her talk about the Kansas Alliance for Wellness starting today.
Thanks so much, Jeff. You can go to the next slide, please. Awesome. Yes. Good morning. Hi. Hello from sunny, albeit kind of chilly Manhattan, Kansas. We refer to ourselves as the Little Apple for any of those of you who are calling in from the East Coast. My name is Miranda Klugesers. I am the director of the Kansas Alliance for Wellness. In fact, I just celebrated my first anniversary as director, and boy, what a year it has been to start a new job, especially in public health. I'm really excited today to share with you a snapshot of the food systems work that's taking place in the Heartland. Just a real quick brief overview. I'm going to provide some background on Kansas Alliance for Wellness and just in general the Kansas Food Council landscape. I'm going to share some stories of council, both individual as well as collective successes in 2020, and ultimately how councils have really harnessed the challenges that this year has presented to ultimately end up in a really great spot. And then finally, we'd like to spend a couple minutes just talking about where we as a state plan to go from here. I'm super fortunate to have the support and guidance of a bright and highly capable team behind me. You need it when you start a job in the middle of a pandemic. But on the call today, helping me to monitor and answer any questions, as well as to provide links and resources, is our outgoing state representative, Eileen Horn. She helped to found the very first food policy council in the state, the one that Jeff just referred to, the Douglas County Food Policy Council. And she currently serves as a policy and advocacy consultant with the Kansas Alliance for Wellness. She is a fount of knowledge for all things food systems, so please feel free to engage with her in the Q&A section if she responds to you at all. I'd also encourage any Kansas councils that are out there on the call. I know a number of you said that you would call in today. I'm not going to have time to share all of your stories, so please feel free to chime in with anecdotes or perspectives from your own region. Next slide. Thanks. So the Kansas Alliance for Wellness, or CAW for short, we are a statewide network of sunflower local food and farm councils. As Jeff said, we just moved to Casey Healthy Kids in 2020. The project, like he said, was initially under the American Heart Association, but they did such an incredible job building the capacity of councils that it essentially outgrew the capacity of the American Heart Association, whose policy focus is primarily on healthy eating and active living. But as I'm sure so many of you know, food council work tends to focus on larger food systems issues, and our councils across the state were taking on increasingly complex challenges such as food waste, transportation, cottage food laws, etc. So the torch was passed to us and the organization I now work for, which has an extensive organizational history in all aspects of food policy. So together, we still provide councils with technical assistance, trainings, and opportunities to network with each other. This year, we have transitioned to less of an emphasis on project work and more on policy systems and environmental work to really sustain the momentum that we see taking place across the state. And I'll talk a little bit about more where we plan to take CAW in this new era at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So just a bit about Kansas Food Councils. So we currently have 31 councils covering 43 counties. Kansas has 105 counties, so we're just under half. We are lucky because of our low population to have the highest number of councils per capita in the nation. And most of the people in our state are represented by a local or regional food council. You'll hear me refer to food councils in Kansas as food, farm, policy councils, or coalitions, food, farm, and community alliances. The reason being that many communities in Kansas are highly sensitive to the word policy. It conveys a kind of top-down structure that doesn't always reflect the needs or wants or priorities of a community. The very names that councils take on are typically representative of the diverse nature of councils in the state of Kansas. All of our councils are in vastly different places in terms of capacity, what their community priorities are, and what ultimately they are able to accomplish, even in their stage of development. Regardless of what they call themselves, their food council goals are similar: to harness the power of community to create a food system that works for their community. Most councils in Kansas started as a group of concerned citizens or stakeholders, and then were eventually formalized as an advisory board or a task force under their city or county government. That they could also take on the form of a grassroots project under a local nonprofit. And some councils in Kansas are a combination of the two models. In Kansas, most councils, though, exist under what we call the governmental model. So they typically, like I said, exist as a kind of advocacy arm or advisory arm to their local government on things food policy council or food policy. With a handful of exceptions, the vast majority of councils across our state are volunteer-led and operate on budgets of $10,000 or less. We do have a couple of councils who have paid staff support, and by a couple, I mean maybe 3. A number of members on councils typically take time out of their everyday job at a health department or research and extension to lend their time to a council. But a large majority of them are just very concerned citizens that are excited about creating change. Next slide, please. Here we go. So this is a map of all of the food and farm councils in Kansas, and it is accurate as of 2 weeks ago, so you guys are the first ones to see it. Orange blocks are existing councils. Green are communities that are in the process of establishing a council but have not yet been formalized, so they may be going through a task force conversation or are already working and just need to get a resolution in front of their council, etc. The stars that you see on primarily the right-hand side of the state are represent councils that represent a city, not the whole county in and of itself. And then the 3 areas you see with darker orange lines represent what we call regional councils. So these are individual counties who essentially pooled their efforts to impact food systems across a specified region. For example, you'll see in the top left-hand corner, that's Northwest Kansas, the Western Prairie Food, Farm, and Community Alliance. They, for example, cover 9 counties and 30,000 square miles of remote Kansas. This is the part of the state that borders Nebraska and Colorado. I have to remember a map. And if you've ever driven I-70, it is just straight plains. But they have really taken focus on developing a regional approach to shore up local food systems. And we'll talk a little bit more about what they did this year next. Next slide, please. there you go. Okay. So the impact of COVID-19 hit our state about the second week of March. So it was about 13 weeks after we took over the project. Prior to that time, I had been out on listening tours across the state, really just meeting with councils, hearing what they had been working on, what their priorities were, and really just getting to know their community. In 2016, I helped to start a local food council in central Kansas, but it had been a couple of years since I had been involved on the ground. So it was really a great opportunity to get back out and really see what the communities across the state were working on. And then the pandemic hit, and it really just laid bare the food systems across the nation, but especially so in Kansas. Between meatpacking outbreaks and just supply chain disruptions, especially in more remote parts of the state, I think it's easy to say that never in our collective memory had more attention been paid to food systems. But just when we started to need them the most, the councils started to pause their work. This happened for several reasons, but not the least of which, as we later found out through many extensive conversations with them, that the strategies and work plans under which they had been operating for so long, the past 3, 5, 7 years, through the first 2 phases of the Kansas Alliance for Wellness project, really didn't fit the needs or what was most necessary in their community anymore. Essentially, the councils told us they felt, they felt irrelevant, and more than anything, they were just overwhelmed and had no idea where to begin. So my team and I pivoted our own original strategy and instead implemented an emergency plan to help the communities address their emerging needs. And in doing so, actually developed a new strategy for moving forward ourselves, which we'll talk about in a moment. I could host a 3-hour webinar just on the work done by the councils in 2020. I picked a few stories to share with you today. If there are any councils listening and I don't talk about your work, please don't be offended. By default, many of the councils across the state, emergency food access was an easy box in which to fall. So when the USDA, or Immerse to Families Food Box program, launched, a number of councils helped either make aware farmers in their regions, or in some cases even helped engage in the distribution of the boxes. The Western Prairie, for example, the region I was just referencing on the map, by May of 2020, this region hadn't been hit by the virus, but they were highly vulnerable to the supply chain disruptions, which we were all seeing. Food just flew off the shelves, and it would take weeks for another delivery to get out to that region because it is so remote. So to supplement barren pantries and just people who didn't have access to food in general, their council leader, Ms. Jimerson, put out a call for volunteers after signing up for a truck with the Farmers to Families boxes to come out to the region, and asked for volunteers essentially to help come out and distribute. And wow, did their community step up. A local sign and tent company loaded the boxes into his, his big trailer, the 16-wheeler, excuse me. On the way back from a job, the college brought their forklift to help unload and then distribute the boxes. And then 5 food pantries across 9 counties sent volunteers to pick up boxes and then bring them back to their own region. And it got to the point that even the people receiving the boxes got out of their cars to help distribute to others. And they did this every single week from June to September, distributing 880 boxes every week in under an hour. Other councils planted more crops in their community gardens to supplement local pantries. Some counties, such as the county in Reno County in the south of the state, took up SNAP outreach to completely change the direction of their council's priorities, and instead focused entirely on helping to sign folks in their community up for SNAP. The past year also provided opportunities to shed light on the importance of the role that councils essentially can play in addressing racial equity. In a predominantly white and rural state like Kansas, these conversations, quite frankly, do not come easily. And all of our councils are in a vastly different place to start having these conversations and doing this kind of work. But it's put us in a position that we as a network are able to start moving forward on. Some of our councils that are ready to have these conversations, such as the Douglas County Council that I addressed earlier, earlier in the year, the state allocated $9 million of the federal COVID relief funds to shoring up local food systems. So organizations like grocery stores, restaurants, nonprofits that worked in the food system could apply for grants. So the Douglas County Council took it upon themselves to essentially provide grant writing assistance to local stakeholders who would qualify, and prioritized organizations that were minority owned or minority led to help get those folks assistance first before moving on to other organizations in the community. One of the biggest things that we've seen shift in the state this year is the capacity of the councils for advocacy. The vast majority of our councils had not engaged in advocacy or policy work prior to the past year or so. And so we really delved into not just giving them opportunities, but also helping to walk beside them in that journey as they built the capacity to do so. We did lobbying calls to Senator Pat Roberts, and our couple of councils sat in with us. And if any of you saw the letter from Feeding America that came around to advocate for nutrition waiver extensions, Kansas was second only to California in the number of organizational sign-ons that we had on that letter. Of the 96 organizations in our state that signed on, over half of them are partners of food policy councils. So really our councils stepped up to help push that letter forward, which was a really exciting move for us, and gave us a sense that all of the work that we had done over the past year, especially in a year of transition, was actually working. Next slide, please. Back one, please. Thanks. So as I've alluded to, we're in a place right now where we're in a different phase of the COP project. And we're really taking this opportunity, especially all of the challenges the past year has provided us, to really imagine what the long-term sustainability of this work looks like in Kansas. But I'm a firm believer that if that isn't, whatever strategy we engage in isn't co-created with the people working on the ground, it's just not going to work. So over the past 6 months or so, we've been in constant conversations with councils and stakeholders, and recently just finalized putting a model together for what we're calling at the moment CAW 2.0. We will likely change the name shortly. And we're envisioning this as essentially a statewide network of councils and stakeholders learning from each other and advancing shared goals through policy. So in essence, CAW will, my team and I will transition from a top-down TA provider to a convening entity that also provides technical assistance. Our objective is to put councils in the driver's seat, essentially, and with stakeholders, harness the collective capacity to create change that extends beyond just the realm of their community to the state as a whole. To get there, we recognize that we need to continue increasing the capacity of councils to engage in what I'm sure everyone on this call knows is incredibly complex work. So we plan to provide trainings and one-on-one coaching as we move forward. But in the meantime, we've also had conversations with stakeholders and the state government about establishing, or rather resurrecting, a statewide food council and what that model could look like. We also plan in the next year to launch what we're currently calling issue-based task forces, where we essentially would like to ask the councils to choose an issue that is really close to their community and bring on other stakeholders or other councils across the state and help them champion it. For example, we have a number of councils that are really interested in cottage food laws or the regulations surrounding what food can be made in a certified kitchen and sold at a farmer's market or traded, just throughout the community, et cetera. And so making those more friendly to compare with other states around us, so that we don't have, for example, folks from the Western Prairie driving up into Nebraska or over into Colorado to sell their goods. So it's all about keeping it local to Kansas. I think that is all we have to share at the moment. The next slide is just our contact information. Please feel free to email us if you have any questions. We'd love to chat with you, as we are somewhat of the babies of this group today. And we just really thank you for your time and the opportunity to share our story with you. Back to you, Kalia.
All right, thank you, Miranda and Jeff, and all of our presenters. We'll actually have our presenters all come back online, have their videos up, because we're going to switch over to some Q&A. We have just a few minutes, and before we head in there, I'll just ask that Miranda and Jeff, if you'd like to include your contact information in the chat box along with all of our other presenters. I've had several questions getting answered throughout the presentation, but now we're going to open up the floor to any of our presenters who feel that they can answer some of these following questions. So first question, speaking to relaxing state and federal policies, how can we break through the resistance? Thinking about government laws introduced, like what happened with cigarettes. Anyone want to jump onto that question? We started with a tough one.
Leah, I'm sorry, is that question posted somewhere? I need to read it.
Yeah, in the Q&A from—
What is in the Q&A? I'm sorry, I'm just getting back to it.
Sure, Michael Garahan, how can we break through the resistance government laws introduced, like what happened with cigarettes?
I can maybe talk a little bit about this. I have a background in state and, well, more federal policy advocacy. And I used to work for the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition on a project here in Michigan. So I think everything we do is all about relationship building, and it's all about having those advocacy skills. I think like that's a focus that we have taken over the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years with our council and building with our state council network and building their capacity to, clearly state their case, do coalition building so that it's clear that the asks that you're making aren't just a whim, they're not a trend, they're not just a couple of constituents. It's about kind of really, I think those, for any challenging policy issue, you need kind of this coalition behind you to make that case. And policy change has, comes from like lots of different spaces. There's a really good model. I'd have to think about what it is, but it's, there's things that are where you have a solution that's kind of, I'm going to be terrible at explaining this. I'll see if I can find it. But I think it's finding those solutions and figuring out where is their will to push for that change and building coalitions around that.
Thank you, Lindsay. Anyone else want to jump in with a quick answer?
This is Jeff. I mean, one of the things we found in Kansas was really, I mean, that's why I think it's important to really focus locally, because with tobacco, with the smoke-free environment work, we started at the local community levels, and we saw more and more communities becoming successful at getting community-wide smoke-free environments. And then it wasn't even a push when the state took it on, and so they just kept piling up. The largest communities that started doing it, and I think the other piece is it is about building relationship as well, but it's seeing that success and then it just kind of snowballs.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So another question, is there a forum that brings leaders of state level food plan / policy councils together to coordinate and exchange experiences?
Yeah,
I would say the Food Policy Network. Yeah, so the Food Policy Network ran through the Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future. I would highly recommend their listserv. It's been extremely helpful, especially for someone like me who's still now getting back into food system work after a year out of it. You know, they are great conversations that take place there, and it's really a great opportunity for shared learning. So you should be able to sign up on their website.
And it looks like Lindsay just posted that link in the chat box. So thanks for that, Lindsay. Here is.
Sorry. Can I just add?
Go ahead.
They used to host kind of sporadic calls exactly for that, for statewide networks of councils. So I'm on their advisory group. I could talk to them about whether they have capacity to start that back up again. And I think that if they don't, I think there's probably enough momentum, particularly around this idea of shared gifting, to set something up to have a call about that and invite folks who are attending today.
Very valuable addition, Liz. Thank you. So we've got time for maybe about one other question. I know we have several questions, but have the councils or network been able to institute policies that specifically tie the needs of people for affordable, healthy food to the needs of local sustainable farms for viable livelihoods? Any examples?
I think this is a really big one and critical for regional food systems work. I can say we can point to examples, particularly in COVID response. And I know in our microgrant funding, certainly, but there are also other larger examples where, you know, the need for food in emergency response has been extremely high, and the support for local farms and for Black and brown farmers product has been a great solution for that need. And we've seen councils really supporting projects that make that link between organizations that are working to create meals or aggregate food from local farmers and local restaurant owners that purchase from local farms in order to feed folks in this, particularly this year during COVID. So I think there's some great examples in there, and there have been some new connections and relationships that have been built. I know in North Carolina that there's real interest to continue those relationships and to build the conversation around how do we build an infrastructure for a regional food system that can feed our communities, including support for the issue of hunger, but also really thinking beyond that to the root cause issues of hunger and how regional food systems can support getting beyond the hunger issue. So it's a really complex question. I think COVID is offering some opportunities for some aha moments that we've known about for a long time as folks who do food systems work, but to really elevate the conversation. So I think it's a great time to keep asking that question and pushing for those kinds of solutions.
And we've got some more resources being put up there in the chat box. The questions are continuing to be answered through text in the Q&A. And unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of our time, and we do want to transition into a poll question if you're ready for that, Rich.
Okay. I am looking for.
All right, here is our ending poll question. So based on what was covered in today's webinar, what would you like to learn more about? You can select one or more choices. So we'll wait just for a second for responses to roll in. And in the meantime, while we're waiting for those responses to come in, Abby, I saw a question in there about what is a solidarity economy, if you could give a quick response to that.
Sure. A great place to check this out is the Highlander Center, which is based in Tennessee, and they're doing some work to organized, particularly in the southeastern part of the US, around what a solidarity economy might look like. Basically, a solidarity economy really gets at this concept of what we think about as an equitable system. So how are we really focusing on what we currently externalize in our systems? In the food system, for example, labor is something that is often externalized, health insurance externalized. So how do we create an economy that really accounts for all of the things that actually make that economy run, is how I would talk about it. And so we're really interested to look at what does the intersection of an equitable food system look like in the construct of a solidarity economy.
Great, thank you, Abby. And I think, Rich, we can go ahead and end that poll and share the results. It looks like the majority of respondents, 60%, are interested in making the local regional food system in their region more resilient to system shocks, such as the pandemic. About half of you were interested in more information about financial support for food policy councils or networks, as well as operationalizing equity principles into food policy council network work. And then about a third of you were interested in establishing state or regional food policy council networks and developing a state food system charter framework. So thank you, Rich, for setting up that poll. As we close out, I just want to give a big thank you to all of our presenters today: Liz Ginsler, Lindsay Scalera, Lashana Austria, Abby Piner, Miranda Klugesers, and Jeff Usher. We are looking forward to continuing this conversation. Clearly, there's a lot more to talk about. We didn't even begin to scratch the surface. So before we completely close out, I'm going to hand it back over to Rich to share a few bits of outgoing information.
Thanks, Kalia. Just wanted to share with you all that not only the recording, but the link to the slides, which could have all the presenter contact information, will be made available not only to the attendees, but to all the registrants. We had about 340 attendees, but we had over 780 registrants for the webinar from most of all 50 of the states and around the country. So that's what I wanted to share. Back to you, Clea, to close.
All right, we hope that this presentation was very informative for each of you, and we do have some remaining Q&A questions that we will circulate among our presenters and send that out with the slides. So we'll be working on that, and we hope that all of you enjoy the holidays, however you celebrate them, with your friends and family, and here's to entering into 2021 with hope and energy. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone else is doing.